Hi, thanks for joining us for this pre-interview for LVL.UP KL, the Geo edition. With me today are our co-organizers, Damien Santer, Tim, and Colin from here, traveled all the way from Singapore. So, hey, Damien, how are you?
Very well, how are you?
So, just for the interest of all our people who might be thinking whether to come for LVL.UP tonight, why don't you tell us about yourself?
No worries. So, I started off in Geo back in 2004 when Google first launched their enterprise partner program outside America. So they tapped us in Sydney to be one of their partners, and we came on board to sell Google Maps licenses, amongst other things like Google Search Appliance and Google Apps. And things went quite well. They asked us to come over to Southeast Asia to help them open the market here, and never looked back. So prior to that, I had no experience in Geo, but working with the Google Maps product, we saw a huge gap between the big heavy GIS and people who were doing their own development with Google Maps, and that's what we tried to focus ourselves on.
Oh, so tell me, what exactly does GeoMash do?
So GeoMash is a spatial platform. Our aim is to allow people to roll out enterprise applications or portal applications or just mashups without having to write a large amount of code or have any understanding of what GIS or the back end has to do.
So when you say people, you mean specifically developers,
not just
businesses?
Not just developers, businesses, community groups, along with developers.
Okay, so why don't you share with me what are some of your biggest complex solutions that you have done? And
So we do a lot of work with infrastructure planning. People like telecommunications organisations or banks who are trying to work out where they want to put up a new tower or where they want to open a new branch or merge two branches together. Okay. So we do a lot of analytics based on the density of population, the performance of individual branches or the load of individual towers, depending what industry we're talking about.
Okay. And then what's the most basic, simple thing that you've done?
Usually just a store locator.
Store locator?
Yeah, so it could be someone who has 3 restaurants or 3 cafes.
So do you help startups who say, we need to have a solution that helps me find the nearest ATM, for example? Then you will be able to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Help them figure out the
so because we are a platform, we allow developers, whether they're startups or big MNCs, to develop their own application based on the platform. Okay. So what that does is it cuts out the need to understand the geospatial side of things and just focus on the business side of things.
Cool. So why don't you share with me, what do you feel about geo and location-based services in this region, or maybe in KL specifically? What is it that's exciting you right now?
Well, location's a big thing, and it really has become more and more important over the last few years, and not just in the social area. We're seeing a lot of organisations, particularly in the enterprise space, start to take note of that, and not just in their public-facing initiatives, things like mobile apps, but also in their enterprise technologies too. And it's really the ability to provide any user in the organisation the ability to take something which was previously locked in SAP or a business app and put it on a map and work with it on a map that is really what's fascinating for us at the moment.
Okay, so what do you have to say to who do you hope to attract tonight in terms of in terms of what you're planning to share tonight? What type of people are you hoping to attract?
Well, really people who haven't got a lot of experience in geo. Basically anyone who's written web portals or web applications, because a lot of data has got a location aspect to it that doesn't get used. So basically what I want to do is try and open up the eyes of those people who haven't thought about including a map in their apps before to really think about, well, how could I present this information differently? What additional value can I add by putting it on a map?
Cool. Okay. So thanks.
No worries.
We'll look forward to your talk.
Very good.
And the first speaker also happens to be my co-organizer for tonight's event. Please put your hands together for Damien Santer, the CEO of, did I pronounce that right? Damien Santer, CEO for GeoMash.
There we go. We had to go and make it difficult by using Prezi rather than PowerPoint. But good evening. So I'm Damien, the CEO of GeoMash. I've been working in the geo space for a number of years now. Since about 2007, we've been working with Google, rolling out their enterprise technologies, Google Maps, Google Apps, and things of the like, and that's where my interest in geo came from. So in 2011, we really saw a big gap in the geo space between the big picture GIS stuff and developing your own, and that's where GeoMash was formed. I've been here in KL for about 3 years and down in Singapore for 5 years before that, so I like to think of myself as fairly acclimatised. But tonight we're here to talk about web mapping, and that's very much, as I said, the space between going to a full-fledged, oil and gas or exploration, construction style government GIS type project, where we're looking at very big, very technical, very complex solutions, and looking at the space where we have social media portals, enterprise applications, and a number of different things that really could benefit from integration with a map. There we go. So tonight I'm going to give you a 35,000 foot view of starting a geo project. Can I get a bit of an idea, who's out here tonight? So how many of you are not developers of some sort? Coders, designers? Well, okay, that's quite a few. All right, and who here has got no experience or background in the geo space? Never worked with a Google Maps project or any form of online mapping? All right, excellent. So when we think about a map-based project, there are a number of areas that we need to think about. And the first, of course, is what sort of map do we want to put our information on? 9 out of 10 people are probably going to go straight to Google Maps because it's the most popular. A lot of people out there use it in their everyday lives. But there are a lot of other options out there, and we'll get to some of those a little bit later on. Now, from there, you've got the option of how you're physically going to develop the application. A lot of people would automatically assume that if I want to put my data on a Google map, it's got to be the Google API. Or if it's a Nokia map, a Here map, the Here API. There are some options out there. From there, we've got to think about the types of information that we want to represent and the value we want to get from our application. Look at how we can augment our own data with data from external bodies, whether they're government departments or universities or private corporations. And then, only then do we actually think about the actual technical architecture of the application or starting to literally cut code. So some of the most popular mapping APIs out there at the moment, Google obviously, I'm sure we've all used it for how to get from A to B, traffic and directions. Here, which is a Nokia company. They've got a very strong mapping platform which was brought about through the acquisition of Navtech. MapQuest is one that's been around for quite a few years and has been used in a number of high-profile projects. Microsoft Bing, not one of my personal favourites, but a lot of people out there do use it. Apple has been the butt of some jokes recently when they launched their maps, but they are getting stronger and stronger. And finally, OpenStreetMaps, which is the open source community-based platform. Now, one thing a lot of people don't actually realise is a lot of these platforms aren't actually free for corporate and commercial applications. Yes, you can log on to google.com or here.com, sign up for an API key and start your development. But the reality is that if you're actually building an application for a customer or you're doing some form of asset tracking, you're probably actually breaching some sort of license or terms of service. And these are actual commercial grade APIs out there. And over the past few years, that's been one of the biggest things that we found working in the industry. A lot of people say, yep, no worries, we're already using Google Maps and we're already using Microsoft, but they don't realise that there are licensing implications for a lot of these platforms. Now, when we talk about the actual map that you want to show your information on, it's not just a case of looking to the cartography, the maps that already exist. A lot of people, particularly in the gaming community and gaming industry, or indoor mapping, like to come up with their own maps. There was a thing a few years ago where World of Warcraft actually mapped out their entire virtual universe using the Google Maps API. And using that same technology, a lot of people now are going to both indoor mapping, mapping out shopping centres, airports, complexes, office buildings and things of the like, as well as virtual worlds, using those same APIs that we use for web mapping projects. Now, one of the things that is of particular interest to me at the moment is actually the indoor mapping, capture of both 2D and 3D maps of public spaces, but more importantly, how we actually figure out where we are within those spaces. When we look at things like a big shopping complex, so for argument's sake, Mid-Valley City or Pavilion, surrounded by 4 large concrete walls and a thick ceiling, you've got very little chance of actually getting yourself a good solid GPS fix. And a little later tonight, we'll be hearing from someone who's been playing with iBeacon and some development there, which is very interesting. But to actually look at how we do Street View, or True in the case of Nokia, with the vehicles out there driving around the streets with the camera arrays on top, we're starting to see things like this indoor as well, whether it's on a remote controlled vehicle, some form of aerial drone, a Segway, with a camera array to capture real 3D imagery for use in these applications. And these have a number of different applications, particularly in things like directories for these larger areas. So, when it comes to starting to cut code, a lot of people make the assumption that because we are going to display our maps on here maps, that we must use the Here API, or we must use Google for Google. There are a lot of options out there, particularly if you want to keep your code and your applications portable. When it comes to things like Mapstraction, Tim, what's the name of the other one? Open layers, sorry, complete mental blank. These things actually provide you with an ability to publish an application which can switch between Google and Microsoft and Nokia, quite quickly and easily. Once again, there are obviously terms and conditions that you do have to consider for this, particularly when it comes to the commercial players' licenses, but it does give you a lot of flexibility in your applications. So, when we start thinking about the information and the types of applications that we want to put onto a map, one of the most common ones that we get today, and a very, very powerful use case, is analytics. Looking at things like business intelligence tools and data that's commonly provided only in spreadsheets or graphs, and saying that up to 80% of the information in there has some sort of location aspect, and saying how do we actually get more value out of that by displaying it geographically in its location on a map. And that data might be in your SAP or in your CRM. It could be in spreadsheets that only one department have access to, or alternately it could even be in some form of GIS file which a very small team inside a bank or a telco use. So having a think about where all this data is going to come from, outside of analytics, looking at things like workforce management, organisations that have outside sales force, outside service crew, looking at web portals, things like iProperty and CarList. All of these haven't necessarily started from, okay, the map is going to be the centre of our universe. The centre of their universe has been their core business position, what it is they want to do, and saying, okay, let's now take what was a traditional application and put it on a map can take a little bit of rethinking. Working through identifying the data and the data types to bring forward. So when it comes to actually physically getting that information onto a map, a lot of the tools out there, Nokia now have one, Google have one, GeoMash has one, that allows you to upload data directly into a map rather than having to cut code. There are a number of formats out there. CSV, just comma separated value, or Excel spreadsheets are a great way for basic applications. Google's KML is a very well-known standard. GeoJSON and TopoJSON, Tim will touch on a little bit later on. Shape formats, TabDats, MidMIFs. If you're going to work with organisations who do have some sort of experience in GIS, but want to start making some public maps available on their website, or in specific applications, in community initiatives, you're probably going to come across some data in these more proprietary formats. And one trick which you can definitely learn from is the GDL Library. If you're a developer looking to make your first foray into web-based map development, have a look at the GDL Library, because that will definitely help you when it comes to some of the more proprietary and old school formats, getting them up and into your map. So, a lot of value can also be added to these applications through external data, particularly when it comes to things like infrastructure planning and analytics. It might be a customer of yours who's come to you and said, we've got retail locations right across the Klang Valley, but we've got no idea visually how they're performing. You know, every week we get all these spreadsheets back through that say, we sold 14 sprockets, we sold 27 widgets, but you know, what does that actually look like? So to take that onto a map and say, okay, let's visualize that as a heat map and show, green pockets where we've got good, strong areas of sales, red pockets where our outlets aren't performing so well, and actually have that visually on the map. So that can be augmented greatly by looking at external data provision. Things like population, the average income, average age, race distribution for areas. These things mashed into your application provide a lot more value when you're actually presenting these applications to users. And the external data can come from a lot of different places. We work with a lot of the government departments here in Malaysia, people like GeoMash, to get population and demographic information, census. In any given market, the majority telco has large databases which they often commercialise for this purpose. And then, of course, there are private companies such as here, which through their NavTech data have got massive databases of points of interest, whether it's hospitals, schools, nearest post office, etc., which add value to what you're trying to do. So once you've thought about that, once you've chosen what sort of map you want to put your information on, how you want to visually present that, where the data is coming from in the organisation, how you're going to add value to that data with data from outside the organisation, you've now got to stop and think, all right, so I'm going to build this app. Where to from here? So the architecture of an app, Tim's going to go into in a lot greater detail than I, much better qualified. But at a high level, to think about where you want to store that information for your application. Do you want to leave it off board, leave it in its source systems, scattered around the enterprise? Is it something that you're going to suck in and actually have on board in your application itself? From there, do you want to go directly to the mapping APIs, or are you going to have some form of middleware layer which allows you to develop a lot more of the business logic and security? So once you've sorted all that out, is it time to start cutting code? Probably not quite yet. There are a lot of traps for young players when it comes to this sort of thing. A lot of the times we go out to see customers and we'll be given a situation where they might have 20,000 points around the Klang Valley and try to put all 20,000 of those on a single map. All of a sudden the browser chokes. 20,000 points represents a lot of data. It could be 10 or 11 meg. That coming off the server, down the pipe, into every browser causes a huge bottleneck. The same for polygons. We do a lot of work in wireless networking, representing the entire cellular coverage of a telco provider, trying to pull that down into the map in one go as well. Huge amount of data. So Tim's going to go into a lot of detail later on about how you think about segmenting that data, working with the data, and optimizing your spatial applications to really ensure crisp performance and a good experience for the users. The second one I've touched on already, and that is the legal terms and conditions. If you've got a startup which relies on mapping technology, or you're selling something to a customer, I do urge you to read the terms and conditions of your chosen base maps very carefully. For example, all of the most common tile providers do not allow any form of asset tracking or GPS integration on their free APIs. So that means if you're running an application, even a mobile app, which is tracking a salesman or a vehicle or a service person or any form of location-based sensor, you do need to look at commercial licensing or something like OpenStreetMaps. Likewise, most of these platforms don't allow enterprise applications free of charge. They are, after all, businesses and have commercial models for that. And then finally, working with data that you're given from elsewhere in the organisation. If you're given some shape files or you're given a tab file for argument's sake, one of the things that it's important to look at is your chosen map platform, what the default projection and datum are. And at a high level, that's basically how we map two-dimensional space onto the arc of the Earth, and making sure that the data that you've got is matching what you're trying to do in the system. So finally, with this, there are options. Rather than developing from scratch and just licensing an API, even if you're a very proficient JavaScript developer, sometimes there is benefit in actually looking at either open source or commercial platforms that provide a lot of the functionality you're looking for out of the box. Some examples of this are Decata, who Google used for a lot of their functionality early on. Mapbox have subscriptions from $5 a month for various applications. Maptitude is another common one. GeoMash ourselves in this space. And then if you're looking at something which is more geotechnical, something which has to be accurate to, a centimetre as opposed to, 1 metre or 3 metres or 500 metres, you do of course have the more traditional full stack GIS applications. So hopefully that's been a very quick 35,000 foot view of thinking about where to start. A couple of big names that you're probably familiar with, hopefully some that you're not so familiar with, but that's what I have for you this evening. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm going to hand back to Wuhan.
Thank you.